Dear viewers, welcome to the launch of the SLEU Economic Update 2021. This year's Future Economic Update has a special topic close to the hearts of all of us, that's looking into the welfare and poverty effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. The report will also look into the recent economic developments and the pathways to the near future. And we have an exciting panel that will be presenting, sharing the findings of this exciting report. I do welcome viewers to be active and share their views, positive compliments, and also to disseminate the report widely. We are live on YouTube, on Facebook. We have followers on Twitter, and also live on AYV television. So with those few remarks, I would like to welcome the Honorable Minister of Finance, Honorable Dennis Vandi, who is joining us today. We also have colleagues from the World Bank connected. We have Pierre Laporte, the country director for Ghana, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. We have Francisco Caniero, who is the practice manager for macro and fiscal with the World Bank Group, and colleagues who have played a key role in shaping and developing this report, including Simon Davis, senior economist, Kemo Mansari, senior economist, Salosh Satar, senior economist. We have an exciting panel that will follow after the opening remarks, including Mr. Sheku Bangura, Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. Ibrahim Stevens, Deputy Governor, Bank of Sierra Leone, Ms. Aina Mo, Managing Director, EcoBank Sierra Leone, Ms. Monique Newick, IMF Country Representative for Sierra Leone, and Mr. Aurelian Cruz, the lead economist with the World Bank Group covering Ghana, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. So with those few opening remarks, allow me to welcome Pierre Laporte, the World Bank Country Director for Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Ghana, to give us opening remarks on the economic update that we are launching today. Over to you, Pierre. Welcome once again.
Thank you, Abdul. Honorable Minister of Finance, Mr. Dennis Vandi, Deputy Governor, Bank of Sierra Leone, Dr. Ibrahim Stevens, other ministers and deputy ministers, Financial Secretary, Minister of Finance, Mr. Sar Njusu, partners from various government agencies and counterparts from the government agencies, development partners, invited guests, CSOs, the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I have the honor to welcome you to the virtual launch of the 2021 Sierra Leone Economic Update. The Economic Update is an annual publication of the World Bank that reports on and analyzes recent economic developments. It also reviews regional and global contexts and analyzes the implications for Sierra Leone and presents the medium-term outlook and prospects for the economy. The World Bank has enjoyed strong collaboration with government during the last few years in preparation of the economic update. And I would like to particularly thank staff of the Ministry of Finance, Stats Sierra Leone, and the Bank of Sierra Leone. And we are just to say that we are proud of this partnership. Sierra Leone's economy contracted by 2.2% in 2020 as the services sector shrank by 10% due to the combined adverse effects of the international and domestic restrictions on trade, travel, and tourism following the global pandemic. Global and domestic restrictions, including supply chain disruptions, depressed activities in agriculture and industry. The fiscal deficit almost doubled, driven mainly as expected by revenue shortfalls and health-related spending pressures. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, as I said. Public debt also increased slightly, reflecting the increase in deficit financed by additional loans. Economic growth is projected to rebound to 3.6% over the medium term, that is 21 to 23, driven mainly by the expected recovery in agriculture and services, as well as increased consumption and investment demand. The fiscal deficit itself is expected to decline gradually to 2.4% of GDP by 2023 as COVID-19 related spending drops while revenue mobilization improves on the back of the expected economic recovery. The economic update features a selected topic entitled Welfare and Poverty Effects of the COVID-19 Pandemic. As elsewhere in West Africa and low-income countries, the report found that poverty is imputed to have increased. A model of household welfare constructed using the 2018 Sierra Leone Integrated Household Survey found that welfare declined for population groups in the top third of the distribution, resulting in an overall decrease in equality. Household consumption for the top 30% is estimated to have declined by 5% per year, compared to 1.3% for the bottom 70%. And while the impacts of the pandemic in Sierra Leone have been much less than in other countries, they have nonetheless set back a country which was already very poor with fragile health and education systems and widespread food insecurity. While households in rural areas have not been made worse off by the pandemic, over 70% of them remain poor. The World Bank has responded by delivering a record $240 million in financing during FY21, including 4 new investment projects, 2 additional financing of existing projects, and a regional energy development policy operation. The World Bank's current portfolio fully reflects the strategic priorities in the new country partnership framework and Sierra Leone's medium-term national development plan, including human capital and energy, among others. Our financing is complementary to support provided by development partners, including the IMF, who I would like to also appreciate their presence today, the EU, and AFDB. It is my hope that this 2021 update will inform and stimulate policy debate and help set an agenda for prioritizing policies for accelerating poverty reduction. Let me end by reassuring you of the World Bank's total commitment to Sierra Leone's development agenda and its post-COVID-19 economic recovery, while we continue to support government to manage the impacts of COVID-19 through our pipeline of projects, including DPO and COVID and other health-related operations. So on this note, let me thank you and wish everyone a fruitful deliberation. Thank you, Abdul. Over back to you.
Thank you so much, Pierre, for the opening remarks. I would like now to request Francisco Cañero to come and provide opening remarks. And I'd also like to recognize the presence of several key government officials, including the Chief Minister and other honorable ministers who have joined us online, and many other development partners. We truly appreciate your active time and participation. So Francisco, over to you, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Abdul. Thank you very much. Minister of Finance, Mr. Dennis Van D, Deputy Governor, Bank of Sierra Leone, Dr. Ibrahim Stevens, other ministers and deputy ministers, Financial Secretary, Minister of Finance, Mr. Sa Jusu, partners from the various government agencies, including our counterparts from the government agencies, development partners, invited guests, CSOs, the media, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to join the country director, Mr. Pierre Laporte, in welcoming you to the launch of the 2021 Sierra Leone Economic Update. As you have heard from Pierre, the Economic Update is an annual publication of the World Bank that presents recent economic developments and prospects and discusses policy-relevant special topics. I believe you're very familiar with this product that the bank produces every year. And this year, a special topic is focused on the welfare and poverty effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, which I think is a very relevant topic given the current situation the global economy is going through. The report finds that restrictions put in place to contain the spread of the COVID-19, as well as the downturn in the global economy, have led to a small increase in poverty, reversing the previous trend of poverty reduction. Our analysis shows that based on data from the 2018 Sierra Leone Integrated Household Survey, poverty has increased from 56.8% in 2018 to 58.9% in 2020. Urban areas, particularly the capital city, Freetown, have seen the largest increase in poverty. Direct reports from households confirm that they have seen a decrease in incomes, particularly from self-employment and jobs in the private sector. Incomes from self-employment, mainly small trading activities, were the hardest hit, followed by formal jobs in the private sector. Food security has also declined, with households feeling the brunt of high food price inflation. The decrease in food security appears to be the largest in urban households, which have also suffered the greatest decrease in consumption as they cannot fall back on unproduced food. Now, though Sierra Leone's economy is expected to rebound over the medium term, the outlook faces significant risks and uncertainties. The main risks which could hinder a faster economic recovery from the pandemic include the slow rollout of the COVID-19 vaccines, continued existence of high domestic payment arrears, lower than expected public revenues, high pandemic-related spending pressures, and rapid growth in monetary aggregates, with the associated inflationary risks as well as financial sector weaknesses. In that context, policy priorities over the short to medium term should focus on strengthening the response to the pandemic by rolling out a strong vaccination program and implementing broad-based macroeconomic reforms to support a quick economic recovery. Developing and implementing a robust vaccination program that targets inoculation of population at risk must be a top priority. Furthermore, addressing existing macroeconomic weaknesses and implementing reforms to mitigate the existing risks to the medium-term recovery will be critical for a sustained inclusive economic recovery that supports poverty reduction. The team will elaborate on this and present in more detail the findings and policy priorities shortly. But ladies and gentlemen, I joined the country director in acknowledging the outstanding support and collaboration from the authorities during the preparation of this economic update. In particular, Minister of Finance, SL, and Bank of Sierra Leone have provided the necessary information for conducting the analysis and were fully involved in the review process. It's my fervent hope that this report will help you stimulate further policy discussions, not only today, but also in the future. With this, I thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a very healthy and profitable discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Francisco. Dear viewers, we've had opening remarks from the country director and the practice manager. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Minister of Finance, who will be giving us a keynote speech on the economic update. Honorable Denis Vandi, Minister of Finance, please welcome, and good to see you again. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Country Manager, Director Pierre for Sierra Leone, Ghana, and Liberia, Francisco, and the Chief Minister, and all those connected. I want to take this opportunity to be honored as the keynote speaker for this gracious occasion. So let me first of all start by expressing my appreciation to the World Bank Country Office and the entire staff of the bank for according me this opportunity to serve as guest of honor in the launch of the Sierra Leone Economic Update. I would like to, on behalf of His Excellency the President, Dr. Julius Maada Bio, and the people of Sierra Leone, thank the bank for the great support you have been extending to Sierra Leone to complement our development efforts in grant resources and loans to both the private and public sector. Most recently, a budget support grant of $100 million was given to the government of Sierra Leone to mitigate and contain the spread of the COVID-19, as well as to sustain livelihoods of the people of the country. We look forward to a continued collaborative approach to our collective drive in reshaping and transforming this country for the good of all Sierra Leoneans. I want to assure the bank and all Sierra Leoneans that government will continue to remain committed to meeting the objectives set out since coming into governance in 2018. Our government has been implementing sound economic policies to ensure the economic recovers and maintain macroeconomic stability by focusing on fiscal consolidation through domestic revenue mobilization and expenditure rationalization that will create the fiscal space to support livelihoods of our citizens, especially during this crisis period. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the current global health crisis, COVID-19, weakened our economy in 2020, constrained economic activities, and as a result, the economy contracted to 2.2%. Based on our economic performance and other macroeconomic indicators so far, the economy is projected to recover strongly from the negative growth in 2020 to 3% in 2021, 4% in 2022, 4.8% in 2023, and 5.4% in 2024, largely driven by agriculture, mining, construction, and service sectors. Consumer price inflation declined to 8.9% at the end of March 2021 before increasing to 9.8% in May, 10.2% in June 2021. However, we have projected the CPI at 13.3% by end 2021. We must note that the moderate inflation rate is underpinned by factors such as relative stability in the Leone against the US dollar, prudent fiscal policy measures, and availability of basic food commodities. Ladies and gentlemen, domestic revenue fell short of the pre-COVID projections of 6.4 trillion to 5.5 trillion, 13.3% of GDP in 2020, relative to 5.4 trillion, 14.6% of GDP collected in 2019. This was due to administrative reforms expected to have gone live in 2020 that were delayed due to traveling restrictions of foreign experts or shipping obstructions of equipment meant for implementation of these reform projects. Revenue streams including income tax, import duties, GST, collection from mines, etc., are expected to contribute to an improved revenue performance in 2021 and in the medium term. However, huge expenditures to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 resulted to the widening of the fiscal deficit to 5.6% of GDP in 2020. Exports dropped to 14.2% of GDP, whilst imports fell to 29.1% of GDP due to weak domestic activities in 2020 and lower global demands and disruptions of FDI flows. The financial sector remained relatively stable and resilient as financial indicators, including total assets, gross loans, advances, and deposits improved in 2020. The implementation of loan write-off policy loan recovery, mainly from government contractors, payment of existing non-performing facilities by large borrowers, and other measures led to an improvement in non-performing loans during the period. Government's response to save lives and livelihood was reflected in several measures implemented as indicated in the Quick Action Economic Recovery Program and the Comprehensive COVID-19 Health Sector Response Plan. We are continuing to monitor and ensure that an adequate stock level of essential commodities are available and at stable prices to support the hardest hit businesses to enable them to continue operations and avert layoffs of employees and expand safety nets to vulnerable groups, to support labor-based public works, providing assistance for local production and processing of staple food items. It is worth mentioning, ladies and gentlemen, that under the above categories, the Bank of Sierra Leone provided 500 billion loans, special credit facility channeled through commercial banks to businesses that supported the production and importation of essential commodities. Government also supported SMEs through the operationalization of the National Microfinance Program, MUNAFA Fund, and launched the Agricultural Credit Facility, the ACF. For this, an amount of 30 billion was deposited by Ministry of Finance for the first phase, out of which 26.1 billion was disbursed to the approved financial services providers in March 12, 2021, targeting 4,100 micro, small, medium enterprises. In turn, the financial services providers have disbursed 22.5 billion to 4,324 micro, small, medium enterprises, exceeding the target already. As at May 2021, the total disbursed loans 3,350 are female and beneficiaries, and 974 are male. We will continue to provide livelihood support to vulnerable households through other agencies of government like NACSA and support NACOVAC operations, strengthen health systems, and continue to make financial transactions public as part of our mandate to ensuring transparency and accountability to our citizens. We are currently working hard to ensuring that COVID vaccines are made available soonest to our citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, at this juncture, I therefore invite you all to join me to formally launch this 2021 Sierra Leone Economic Update. I thank you all.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, for the keynote speech. Truly appreciate it. And with that, I would like now to welcome our colleagues from the bank to give us detailed account of the recent economic developments, as well as analysis of the welfare impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. We will straight on begin with looking at what are the recent economic developments and what key lessons do we learn from them moving forward. So with that, Kemo Mansari presenting. Kemo?
Yes.
Over to you, please.
Thank you.
I think we need to get the right presentation.
Yes, that's it.
Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Abdul. As you
Hi, Guillermo. I don't know if it's just me, but the sound has just switched off. We don't hear you anymore. It might just be me.
can you hear me?
Now we
Yes,
can.
it's good.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay, good.
Here.
Thank you, Abdul. And as you said, part one of the presentation will focus on recent economic developments. My colleague Sarush connected will present part 2 of the report, which Abdul also talked about, the welfare impacts of COVID-19. I'll go straight into recent economic developments, but first let me thank those who have made remarks, our country director, Francisco, and the Honorable Minister. They've made my job easier because they partly delved into some of the issues. Thank you. So, as I said, on recent economic developments, we want to look at what happened to the real sector. I think you've heard from various speeches that the economy contracted in 2020. And there are two sides to look at this. There are two sides of a coin. When you look at the supply side, really the main reason for the contraction was really the shrinking of the service sector. And of course, we all know that the service sector is more contact intensive, and most of the restrictions that we have put in place to mitigate the effect of the pandemic really hurt the service sector in tourism, trade, and travel, and so on and so forth. So we saw a large contraction in the service sector, which pushed the overall output, real GDP of the economy contracted as a result of that. Even agriculture and industry, if you look at the figure on my right panel, the supply side, agriculture is green and industry is the dark blue. You see that they also slowed down compared to 2019. The share of agriculture also decelerated. So that was what happened in 2020. When you look at the demand side, the main reason also relates to what is happening. Restrictions in global supply chains saw that resulted in a negative net exports. So the change in net exports became negative during the year. In 2019, you saw that exports had recovered from the slowdown of the Ebola. But what we have seen is that that recovery was short-lived. We are seeing the exports in my left panel, which is the gray shaded, also has contracted because of course, restrictions imposed, global supply chain difficulties, and so on and so forth. So we also saw that gross capital formation also, which is the green panel, also slowed down. But consumption was a bit on the positive front. Mainly, we saw that inflation was decelerating, so private consumption picked up, and government spending in response to the pandemic also helped to push public consumption forward. So that was the picture in 2020. So on the supply side, services led to the contraction, but agriculture and industry also slowed down. On the demand side, we saw that net exports also collapsed. So when we look at the picture going forward, I'll talk more on the medium-term outlook. We are seeing a recovery. We're seeing that the economy is going to recover in the medium term, 2021 to 2023. On average, we'll see that the economy will grow by 3.6% over the medium term. And on the supply side, this recovery will be driven by agriculture, recovering industry, and the services. As restrictions are gradually lifted, we expect services to return back to normal. Industry also is projected to pick up, especially given the anticipated recovery in the mining sector. So we hope that this recovery in the supply side will be broad-based, coming from all sectors, agriculture, industry, and services. On the demand side, we continue to see that next export will be sluggish, basically accounting for the uncertainties that are prevailing, but on the whole, gross investments, capital formation, public consumption, and private consumption are expected to pick up over the medium term to support medium-term growth. Now, what we've seen when we analyze the real sector was that due to COVID-19, the economy is actually operating below its potential. So we have what we mean by that the actual output of the economy is lower than its potential. So if you can see on my left panel, you will see that the output gap, which is the difference between the actual and the potential, is negative from 2020, 2021, basically driven by the shock to COVID-19. And this output gap and the economy operating below potential is really affecting households and income. So the second part of the report will delve more into that. You'll see that the economy is expected to recover in 2023 and 2022 and 2023. But the actual output loss due to COVID, we have estimated at 1.5 trillion leones, 146 million US dollars. And the way we did this was to compare our estimates in 2019 at the annual meetings to our growth estimates in 2021 during the spring meetings. And that gives us the difference to show that the output loss as a result of COVID-19 is about 146 million US dollars, 1.5 trillion. And basically, this is because the economy is operating below potential, you know, and not only because of the COVID-19 shock. Before the shock also, we had seen that total factor productivity, you know, has been sluggish, has been negative, the growth of total factor productivity. So this reinforces the need for policies to really improve productivity, you know, and promote private sector growth. So we expect the output gap to turn back to positive only in 2022. While GDP, real GDP growth may return to its pre-COVID level, the GDP per capita may not do so quickly. It's only in about 2023 that we will see that GDP per capita may return to its pre-COVID level. So we also estimated that GDP per capita had declined by about 5.3% between 2020 and 2021. So that ends the real sector. And on the fiscal sector, what we've seen is that there are two reasons why the outlook and the outturn in the fiscal sector was a bit dampened. First, the revenue shortfalls due to the COVID-19. And as you know, the minister talked about tax relief measures that were provided. There are a lot of tax waivers that were granted on essential commodities, tax deferment to be precise, and that also resulted in revenue shortfalls. The economy contracted, and as you know, tax is a proportion of income, so that also saw that revenue fell. Spending pressures, there are new spending pressures emerged during the year to mitigate the effects of the pandemic. NACOVAC was created, health spending increased, treatment centers were established, and the government had to go back to Parliament to seek approval for a supplementary budget. So we saw that the fiscal deficit during the year almost doubled. But when we adjusted for the cyclical movements in the economy, which is the structural, cyclically adjusted primary balance, we saw that the underlying fiscal stance, although it was expansionary, but was much more lower. So it was actually the shock that was driving the expansion in fiscal policy. So we expect that the fiscal stance may turn from more expansionary to less expansionary going forward over the medium term. So basically, that's the nutshell of what happened with the fiscal sector. Revenue fell, expenditure increased, the deficit widened. But over the medium term, we expect the deficit, the primary deficit to fall, to narrow, and this fiscal outturn to improve. Why? Because we expect the COVID situation to be mitigated. Hopefully, as vaccinations are ramped up, the global situation improves, then spending needs relating to COVID may go down, and that will improve. Also, fiscal measures that were revenue measures that were put in place may be phased out gradually. So we expect the deficit to narrow as we move into the medium term. The challenges, because of the high fiscal deficit we have in 2020, we've seen that public debt increased, and as we speak, the country is still at a high risk of debt distress. What this chart actually shows is what we call debt burden indicators, which shows the present value of debt to GDP ratio, debt to exports, debt service to export, and debt service to revenue. And there's a threshold in the green dotted line. And what you see there is that under the baseline scenario, all debt burden indicators are breaching their threshold, which means that the country technically is at a high risk of debt distress. And it's particularly worrying for what we call the liquidity indicators, debt service to revenue. You see that the breach is protracted, which is the on my right, the debt service to revenue on the bottom, the last chart on graph on the bottom. You see that the breach it's above the threshold all through the projection period up to 2030. So this reinforces the need to really rapidly improve revenue mobilization to pay down the debt. Also, we noticed also that in terms of export, debt service to export also has breached the threshold over the medium term. Even the present value of debt to GDP ratio also breaches thresholds. Well, the threshold, actually, you may be asking what the threshold is. It comes from what we call the debt carrying capacity, which actually measures macroeconomic fundamentals and the policy and institutional framework of a country. So what we've seen recently is because of the COVID-19 shock, fundamentals deteriorated and the debt carrying capacity of Sierra Leone went down. So you see that the thresholds for these indicators are a bit lower, and which is amplifying, debt vulnerabilities. So, but the good news is public debt is still sustainable on a forward-looking basis. So as you know, the country still has the ability to service its debt. It's not in distress, but what this shows the urgent need for reforms to improve debt sustainability, which I'll talk about in the policy priorities. On the external sector, what we saw was that it remained resilient, partly because of the support that was received by development partners. IMF, the World Bank, the EU, as the country director mentioned, brought in unprecedented level of financing, and the official transfers actually paid down the increase in the current account deficit. Current account deficit, which is in the yellow, you will see that in 2020 declined from the high in 2019, basically driven by official transfers. So that was a good picture. But as we noticed also, exports due to the pandemic, the global conditions, demand conditions really eased. So exports declined, and there was not too much demand for the commodity exports of Sierra Leone. So we saw that export tumbled. Imports also slowed down. So also, apart from official transfers, you saw that the slowdown in imports counterbalanced the reduction in exports. So also led to the improvement in the current account deficit, which is in the yellow. So going forward, I'll talk more in the medium term what we expect the external sector to look like. What we've seen also, the financing also cushioned up reserves, and we saw that the exchange rate was relatively stable. Stability in the exchange rate was particularly crucial because in the last 2-3 years, we have seen the exchange rate depreciating in double digits. But in 2020, we saw that the exchange rate depreciated by almost less than 5%. The only worrying trend was that we have seen the gap between the parallel market rate and the official rate widen during 2020. This could be traced back to difficulties in obtaining forex in the official channel. So banks, the public went to the parallel market to meet additional demand for FX. Indeed, the Bank of Sierra Leone also suspected that some of the administrative measures it put in place were diverting activities to the parallel market. It had to lift some of the restrictions, particularly relating to foreign currency accounts. So when that was done, we're seeing in March some stability. The gap between the parallel and official market rates has almost closed, as you can see in the graph there. So the FX premium basically gives you the bars, and which was that the premium between the official and parallel market rates was very wide in 2020, but it has since the reversal by the BSL come down a bit. So the picture for the exchange rate was that it was relatively stable, cushioned by adequate reserves following the inflows, official transfers that were received, and also BSL policy to ensure that they are not speculations in the markets. Inflationary pressure. What we've seen was that there's a 4-year decline, 4-year low of inflation, headline inflation. We saw inflation decline to 10.05% in 2020. That was one of the lowest since 2016. And what actually drove this decline was lower demand for non-food prices. And that was expected as the economy contracted. The demand for housing and non-alcoholic beverages and other non-food items, transportation, all declined following restrictions, inter-district lockdown. So you see, I don't know if it is red, yes, or what's the color? Pardon me. But you see that chart that looks like red, the line that looks like red, declining, collapsing continuously throughout the year. That was the main driver for the decline in headline inflation, which is the dotted line. But what we've seen, and I think the second part of the report will also touch on it, was that food inflation, which came down to a very low 5.4% as of December 2019, spiked up during the pandemic. It rose close to 20%, close to 20% by end of December, around 18.9%. And food price pressures really were the main drivers why we did not see single-digit inflation in 2020. So we saw that food price pressures relating to the restrictions imposed, slowdown in agriculture. I did talk about the slowdown in the agricultural sector in the real sector presentation, and all that led to an increase in food prices, and food price inflation has been going up continuously. But we have seen some slowdown in food prices during the first quarter of 2021. You'll see that food prices came down, basically due to measures imposed by the BSL, providing special credit facilities and other measures to ensure adequate supply of food. On the right panel, you'll see basically the regional distribution of food inflation. And what we have seen is that the South and the North have higher inflation levels. The Southern region and the Northern region have higher inflation levels than the East and the Western area. So the inflation level in the South and East and the South and Northern region is higher than the national level, while that of the Western area is below. West and East is below. Partly explained by nearness to the market, especially in the West, and maybe in the East, agricultural productivity helping. As we've seen, to cushion the effect of the pandemic, monetary policy was accommodative. We saw early on in the pandemic that the BSL cut the monetary policy rate by 150 basis points. It later, as the economy began to pick up in the second half of the year, also reduced the monetary policy rate by another 100 basis points in December. So what this translated into was that the broad money, which is the dotted green line, grew considerably during the year by about 40% year on year as at March. And net credit to government, despite the increased donor inflows, also increased as the financing gap due to the COVID was large and government had to borrow to meet its fiscal needs despite donor inflows. What this shows also is that private sector credit, which is the blue line, although it grew, but it's actually collapsed from the level in 2019. And you can see if you compare net credit to government and net credit to the private sector, you can see the wide gap between the red and the blue line. This actually shows the phenomenon of crowding out. Increased government borrowing is crowding out credit to the private sector. So banks prefer to put lock-in money in low-risk treasury bills rather than give out to the general public. So in terms of the distribution of credits, we'll see that the commerce, retail, and construction sector are the largest recipients of credit. Agriculture which comprises the largest share of the GDP, received the least, and this is worrying. And because agriculture has a large share of GDP, but credit to agriculture is the smallest, and less than 1% of total credit. So this is really a food for thought on how we can stimulate credit to agriculture, especially in light of the current shift in promoting private sector participation. The financial sector broadly remains stable. I think the Minister of Finance touched on that at length. What we saw was that the capital adequacy ratio, which shows the loss absorption capacity of banks, really remained healthy, although it declined slightly, but it is twice more than the statutory minimum of 15%. Non-performing loans, we saw that it declined to 12.7 from a high of 16%. And basically, they are a combination of factors. Government paid down arrears to help as part of its response measures, and those arrears help those contractors liquidate their non-performing facilities. Also, the BSL Special Credit Facility, some banks were very innovative in ensuring that those who want to access the credit facility do pay off the existing facility, because the credit facility by the BSL was at low interest rates. So in order to access low interest facilities, some of the customers had to pay off those debts. So that was the picture. Return on assets, return on equity remained very healthy, 6%, higher than the sub-Saharan average of about 3%. Equity, 25%, return on equity, 25%, higher than 15% average threshold. So we are seeing that banks remain profitable in Sierra Leone. And of course, deposits, assets, and loans expanded during the period. The distribution of non-performing loans, you can see that the biggest non-performing assets, the one in the green on my right here, which is the commerce and retail trade, and it's not surprising. And we saw that the services sector contracted, and most of the downturn in the economic activity really hit this sector. So there are a lot of non-performing assets in that sector, followed by construction and other sectors, manufacturing and other sectors. We're looking at the COVID-19 outlook. Of course, we all know this chart actually showed what has happened when COVID came to Sierra Leone in March. We saw a first wave, March to about June, July, we saw the first wave. Then around December to February, mid-February, we saw a second wave. In fact, outside the scope of this report, we know now there's a third wave, June, July, and additional restrictions have been imposed. As at the time of this report, we had 70 or more people dead, 4,000 infected, but we know now that over 100 people have died and about 6,000 or more have been infected. And this also plays into the outlook that we will talk about. So now we want to look at the medium-term outlook of the economy. I did talk on the real sector. I did mention that we expect the economy to recover in 2021 by 3% and by 2023, 4%. So on average, we expect real economic growth to reach 3.6% on average, basically driven by both domestic and external demand. Domestic demand will pick up. We know that domestic demand declined during the 2020, but we expect that to pick up. Agriculture will improve. Services, as restrictions are lifted, we expect services also to improve. And external demand, as vaccinations in developed and rich nations are reaching higher thresholds, they are also lifting travel restrictions. Global supply chains constraints are being eased. We expect external demand to pick up, especially for the mineral sector, which comprises over 70% of Sierra Leone's export. So external demand is very key for Sierra Leone's medium-term outlook. Agriculture will contribute half of all the growth over the medium term. So it's very crucial, and I think the government is paying the right attention by prioritizing private sector participation in agriculture. Inflationary pressure, we expect it to continue to moderate. By first quarter and even half of the year, we've seen headline inflation in single digits, helped by several measures by the BSL, but also the lower demand in the economy. So it's a two sides of a coin. So as inflation remained subdued it's indicative that the recovery is yet to be fully picked up. So that's one thing to watch. But overall, prudent policy by the BSL will help to keep inflation in single digits over the medium term. The exchange rates will remain stable as we expect exports, external demand to pick up, exports to gradually improve, and prudent monetary policy to stabilize the exchange rate. Fiscal deficits, we have said earlier that it's expected to gradually decline to about 2.4% of GDP. We expect COVID-related spending to ease as the pandemic recedes. Revenue mobilization will be scaled up as government rolled back on discretionary tax waivers, and other revenue reforms are being implemented. So going forward, the external sector is what will remain challenging, because as we know, the external sector performance as the recovery ensues, import demand will pick up, and that will may expect to widen the trade balance and keep the current account very large, although we expect it to moderate. But so it's important we watch what happens to the external sector, especially the current account deficit. But it's expected to be financed by inflows of FDI, especially in agriculture and mining going forward. So finally, we want to look at the risks and policy priorities. Of course, the practice manager, Francisco, talked about the risk in detail. So there are two types of risk: one, COVID-related risk, and domestic and external risk. Of course, we know the COVID-related risks, the Delta strain, ramping up infections, and we are already in the third wave, and which has led the government to impose additional restrictions, the banning churches, mosques, and other public gatherings, limitations on other public gatherings. All those may hold back the recovery. So it's a risk to the recovery. Also, limited access to vaccines, the slow pace of government vaccination program. As we know, the government developed a vaccine development plan, but which plan to inoculate about 20% of the population. But as we speak, less than 5% of Sierra Leoneans have been vaccinated, and vaccines have practically run out. The government needs more vaccines to ramp up its vaccination program. And of course, the Delta strain I've talked about. On the domestic and external front, we talked about the huge stock of arrears, which we know that the government paid down as part of the COVID response, paid about 2% of GDP. But as we speak, arrears, domestic payment arrears, still weigh heavily on public finances, more than 6% of GDP. So clearance of that arrears may have implications for fiscal consolidation and growth going forward. And of course, if revenue reforms and what we are continuing to see, expenditure needs increase, there may be fiscal slippages. So it's also a risk that fiscal slippages may occur despite best efforts by government. External demand could disappoint. We're expecting export to pick up as the global economy recovers, but we know that the recovery is uneven. Some countries are recovering faster than others, and we are seeing those dynamics play out, and which could affect the overall demand for Sierra Leone's export and also the current account deficit. And also the issue of lower than anticipated FDI inflows, foreign direct investment inflows. We expect that with the pandemic, as it recedes, more investors will come in and government implement reforms. But with the uncertainty in the global environment, this may not materialize. Weaknesses in the financial sector, MPL improved, but they are still above the 10% tolerable limit. Interest rates, we know they are very high. There's a widespread between lending and savings rate. So all that's pointing to risk in the financial sector. So those financial sector risks call for the need for financial sector reforms, which we'll talk about. Finally, on policy priorities, there are two types stemming from the risk that we discussed. The short-term priority really focused on addressing the COVID-related risk, which is vaccination, vaccination. Robust vaccination program, ensuring that adequate supply of vaccines. And if you look at the main report, we have discussed in detail how Sierra Leone could leverage its relationship with development partners, multilateral approaches by the African Union to ensure they have more access, the World Bank and the IMF, to ensure that they have more access to vaccines. Use existing structures, its National Vaccine Working Group, community health treatment centers and so on to roll out the vaccination program, not to set up parallel structures. To roll out the vaccination program quickly is to rely on its existing structures and ensure that there's adequate awareness for the citizens to take the vaccines. In the medium to long term, the priorities really is to address macroeconomic weaknesses. We saw the fiscal deficit doubled during 2020. How do we bring back fiscal deficit to its pre-pandemic low of 2% or less? And that is very important. And this is where the trick is. How do you balance the need to lower fiscal deficit, but also cushion the effect of the pandemic on households? The second part of the report will talk more how the pandemic has affected households. So whilst you're trying to lower your debt, trying to reduce your deficit, through reducing your deficit, you should also pay attention that premature consolidation, premature reduction of spending may hurt the recovery and also hurt households, particularly spending on social sector, health, education, and social protection. So the approach is really reprioritizing expenditure to ensure that social spending on health education is safeguarded while non-essential spending is cut, and ramp up revenue mobilization. Through the main thrust of fiscal policy going forward is really how to ramp up revenue mobilization. So the second point is really how you expand the tax base, and we know we're looking at the reforms in the pipeline. The government has very robust reform measures that they have planned: integration of the tax administration system, the ITAS, the rolling out of electronic cash registers that are deemed to expand the tax base, which is very important. Bringing more people into the tax bracket is crucial, and also eliminating tax arrears and rolling back some of the tax deferment policies they implemented in 2020. Debt management is crucial. The importance of debt transparency is critical. We have seen the government commitment in that regard in complying with the World Bank performance policy actions and the IMF debt limit policy. So that's commendable that we are seeing publication of debt owed to state-owned enterprises. The government has capped non-performing, non-concessional borrowing to almost zero. So going forward, really increasing transparency of the debt is crucial. And strengthening debt management, capacity of debt management is also very important. The government recently engaged the World Bank and the IMF for technical assistance on its medium-term debt strategy. We look forward to that, the updated strategy. And monetary policy going forward. We have seen the expansion in monetary aggregates because of the easing of monetary policy as the BSL cut the monetary policy rates. Monetary broad money has grown by over 40%. And this is a risk to inflation, even though it has not translated yet. But faster money growth, we all know, can lead to higher inflationary pressure. So it's something for the BSL to watch, tightening policy as the recovery ensues to ensure that the money growth do not destabilize the recovery. Deepen financial sector reforms to safeguard stability and spur growth. Of course, we know the crowding out of credit is one. So the link between debt management, how government reprioritizes domestic debt, and reprofile it, can limit the crowding out. And the issues of fiscal policy, narrowing the deficit, can reduce the borrowing need of the government, while private sector can channel those funds, while the banking sector can channel those funds to the private sector. But the more important thing in financial reforms as we speak, financial inclusion, which is very key, bringing more people into the formal sector. And of course, we know that the advent of the mobile money and other platforms, the central bank is currently implementing financial inclusion projects supported by the World Bank, which is bound really to help Sierra Leone leapfrog in terms of financial inclusion, allowing for interoperability in different payment platforms. Also, finally, I talked about how total factor productivity growth is negative, and the challenges with the real sector where Sierra Leone continues to operate below its capacity. This reemphasizes the need for structural reforms to support inclusivity. We need to really press the reset button in structural reforms. Reforms to improve the business environment, that's very crucial. Expanding the productivity of the agricultural base, through supporting agribusinesses, through small grants, modernization and mechanization is very crucial. Of course, we know where Sierra Leone is in terms of doing business ranking. We commend the efforts to set up a doing business secretariat, the National Investment Board that is planned to be set up with the president chairing. We hope these efforts will lead to improvement in the overall business environment and attract foreign direct investment, and as well as the domestic private sector. So structural reforms are key. Also, the reliability of the infrastructure, water supply, energy, and so on and so forth is crucial for the private sector. So investment in energy, in water, in roads may help, unlock private sector and investments. Thank you very much for your attention. Abdul, here ends the part one of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking Carol, who's done the fantastic work. As you can tell, a strong foundation of the economic development, and also presented a picture of the economic outlook. So with that, in our background, I would like to invite Sarosh Sata, a senior economist from our poverty team, the poverty and equity team, to share with us the findings on the welfare impact, the welfare and poverty impacts of the global pandemic. Over to you, Sarosh, and I hope you will be able to give us a nice summary so we are able to manage time and also clarity for the viewers. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Let me share my screen. Good, great. I hope you can see the presentation.
Yes,
and I will share during this conversation the highlights from the economic update. Okay, just give me 1 second so I can, here we go. So today what I would like to do is answer for you 4 important questions with regard to the discussion on the impact of the pandemic on the Sierra Leone population. So the 4 questions are: what information exists regarding welfare, and really how do we think about the problem? The second question is, what groups were hurt the most by the pandemic, particularly in monetary terms? The third question I hope to address is, what have been the non-monetary welfare impacts during this time? And finally, I'd like to discuss the issue of mitigation. The presentation, to help guide your thinking throughout, is structured in 3 different components. The first will be to set the stage. The second is to understand welfare before and after the pandemic, or shall we say during the pandemic. And the third is to discuss mitigation. So let me begin by connecting the previous presentation with this one. And as you saw in the macro presentation, when we discuss welfare, we tend to focus on GDP per capita growth or private consumption per capita growth. And looking back to 2011, you can see that in the last couple of years, the pandemic started in March 2020. effectively in terms of sort of a deep beginning the impact on the economy, is that basically at that time, private consumption per capita was virtually stagnant. But these numbers, though they are informative, really do not tell us what is occurring either differentially within the country or among different groups within Sierra Leone. Not only is it important, though, to look at this issue of how people are being affected, but I'd like to quickly take one step back and say, how should we even think about the problem? And as you can see in this particular figure here, the pandemic has impacted the population really through two broad avenues. One is direct effects and the other is indirect effects. And I'm going to focus on the economic effects, but I want to acknowledge the fact that the social effects of the pandemic are broad, but this presentation will not be going into depth on those particular issues. But with regard to the economic effects, the direct effects from illness or death or loss of income or increased health care costs. Indirect effects can be quite broad, ranging from income or employment shocks within the family, producer and consumer price effects, access to services, and human capital acquisitions. And if you like, you can think of the first two effects, meaning the income and employment and producer and consumer price effects, as monetary, and the other two in terms of non-monetary impacts. Now, in order to say anything that is both sensible and credible, we really have to ensure that we have access to data which is nationally representative. For this presentation, I'm using three different sources. One is the Sierra Leone Integrated Household Survey, 2011 and 2018. 2018 provides us with a nice baseline. There were also household surveys, actually phone surveys conducted during the pandemic called the COVID Impact Monitoring Surveys. They were conducted in June and November of 2020. And then finally, the World Food Program conducted a survey called the Comprehensive Food Security and Vulnerability Survey that's also being used here. But basically what I'd like you to take away is that back in 2018, using the Integrated Household Survey, 56.8% of the population lived below the national poverty line. And what this presentation is going to discuss is, well, what happened after that? What can we say in terms of poverty and welfare in general once the pandemic hit Sierra Leone? So let me begin by saying what occurred between 2011 and 2018. And we found that during this period, poverty declined by 6%. It fell significantly in Freetown and other urban areas, but it was stagnant in rural areas. I'll explain to you why it's important to understand what happened in this period compared to what we're going to see happening in the last couple of years. So as already mentioned in the opening remarks, during 2018 to 2020, we find that poverty ended up increasing by 2 percentage points. And if we look at it from a spatial perspective, the impact of the increase in poverty was actually quite diverse if we begin looking at urban versus rural areas. But especially in Freetown, we find that many of the gains that had been made in earlier years of decreasing poverty in Greater Freetown were erased, and poverty almost doubled between 2018 and 2020. And we think that much of the worsening in the poverty situation happened during COVID. In other urban areas, there was a slight increase, but largely stagnant. And in small towns and rural areas, we estimate that poverty improved slightly. Now, the reason I had shared with you earlier about the trend in poverty between 2011 and 2018, where we saw that there were large improvements in welfare in the lower half of the population in Freetown and urban centers, was to really show that if we look at what has happened in the last couple of years, and most likely in this last year of 2020, is that many of those gains that had been achieved and many of the trends that we saw were actually reversed during COVID, with the increase in poverty in Freetown and the stagnation and slight increase in urban areas. But even if we sort of broaden our lens and say, what do we know about welfare in general within the country in these last couple of years? And what you can see is, if in this particular figure, if we stack all of the population in Sierra Leone from the poorest to the wealthiest, with in this graph, with 1 representing the poorest and 100 the sort of the top 1%, what you see is that the change in their expenditures, which is a proxy for welfare, is that the extreme poor, meaning in the bottom 20%, they did not fare particularly well at all compared to the households or the people in the middle of the distribution. But the people who were really hurt significantly in terms of in relative terms were people in the upper third of the population. These were the people who saw the largest decline in expenditures and are most likely the people who are living in Freetown. And the reason that it's really worth appreciating and understanding this particular fact is because it is essential for countries really to have a stable middle class for economic development. And the fact that you see so many people in the upper middle class and middle class who have been affected is indeed of concern. Now, where has this decline in welfare sort of emanated from? So one way to think about it is that households in Sierra Leone are maybe dependent on income from multiple sources. And what this particular survey, the COVID Impact Monitoring Survey, asked households, around 7,000 throughout the country, tell us your three top sources of income. And we focused on self-employed income, wage and salary income, and non-labor income. And among you, how many have seen an increase in a particular source of income, and how many have seen a decrease, and who has actually lost the income altogether? So what we see here in this particular figure, and in the interest of time, I'm going to just focus on the net amount between March and November. So it's this area over here. What you see is that the households that reported being that self-employment income was one of their top three. You can see that the majority of them have reported that their incomes have declined, and then a small portion have also said it's stopped altogether, indicating a loss of that employment. And there are a few, which is the apple green color, have reported an increase. And what you also see in terms of non-labor income, such as remittances, there were a significant proportion of people who have reported a total suspension of having received that type of income. Now, if you compare these people with the people who report farm income, you can see that actually between November 29 and November 2020 is that they have seen on a net basis an increase. They report an increase in their income. And the reason that we look over a different time period is because of the seasonality of farm income. We want to compare to the same season, and therefore we use November 2019 versus November 20. Now, in terms of who suffered the most and the least by this from this pandemic, the worst affected in monetary terms were urban households, and they were households dependent on self-employment income. And irrespective of the sector, whether it was manufacturing, trade, transport, or food services, all households that were dependent on self-employment income were especially hurt. What I would also like to add is that households that were dependent on wage income were hurt, especially from the construction and the transport sector, but not so much people who or households who are dependent on income either from public administration or from or are employed for wage or salary in the education sector. And that makes sense because there was no sort of mass layoffs within the public sector or education sector. We also saw in the previous graph that the worst period in terms of the sharp decline in people's income was between March and June 2020. And we were fortunate to see that despite expectations in the beginning that the mobility restrictions would hurt rice production, this did not happen to be realized. And possibly it's because farmers tend to be less engaged and dependent on the market. Now, moving quickly through the non-monetary impact, I'd like to just touch upon two main areas. One is education, and second is the health sector. And what we saw originally, or what was discussed early on in the pandemic, was that there were great fears that with the school closures and at the time of reopening, the fears were that there would be very high dropout rates, increased teen pregnancy, and high repetition rates. And of these three sort of main fears, it was primarily that there were indeed high repetition rates that occurred, but the other two, in terms of high dropout rates and increased teen pregnancy, did not actualize. So we did see that when schools opened up, students did return to school, and there was no significant increase in teen pregnancies. So what is the implication of that? I think it is worth acknowledging that we see that the Sierra Leonean student population and households were indeed resilient in the way that they returned to school, but nevertheless, there were consequences for human capital, particularly for school-age children. And if we look at what happened with regard to people's health, and if we focus first on the health sector, we see that unfortunately there were consequences and adverse consequences in terms of antenatal care, in terms of a reduction in vaccination rates of children under the age of 18 months, as well as a decline in the delivery of babies by women in health clinics. And though these are all numbers, I think let me remind you that all of this is saying that women and children were indeed affected in terms of their health, in terms of increased possibility of mortality by the decline in the use of health clinics and antenatal care. What Sierra Leone was indeed fortunate in seeing is no disruption in water and sanitation, which is the key component of any health improvement strategy in a country. Here, I'd just like to touch upon briefly this issue of food insecurity. And the reason to highlight food insecurity is that it has actually long-term physical and cognitive implications for children. And so children that suffer from food insecurity may have greater difficulty in terms of school and human capital acquisition. But basically, the message that I would like to impart is that food security worsened during the pandemic, especially among urban households. Rural households, fortunately, were less affected, though they too suffer from food insecurity. And the three main channels through which food insecurity hit the population was through higher food prices, as discussed by Kimo, through declining incomes, as I showed you earlier, and then finally there was an overlap in terms of the lean season that farmers experience and mobility restrictions, meaning that they during the lean season period had less access to food being sold in markets. So the mitigation measures that the government has taken in terms of their fiscal response was they passed a supplemental budget. And if you look carefully at the supplemental budget, you can see that a third of it went to increase spending on health, which obviously makes sense during a pandemic. And another third was devoted to public works programs, which is essential for providing a safety net for people in need. The other thing that they did, which is very impressive, particularly because it appears to have been very successful was the Emergency Cash Transfer Program, which was administered by the National Commission for Social Action. And what this particular program did is that it targeted informal sector workers, those workers, as we saw, who were hurt significantly by the pandemic, and they provided support to them and reaching the self-employed in Freetown and 4 other cities. So in closing, I'd like to summarize a few of the findings. The first is that there were disruptions in health and education service delivery. Fortunately, the adverse outcomes were not as bad as people had feared, policymakers had feared in the beginning, but we must acknowledge that the situation indeed remains fragile, and support should be maintained, and a focus on monitoring the health and education sectors and acquisition remains a priority. The second point is that restrictions in mobility really have large consequences for any country, including Sierra Leone. It disrupts supply chains, it affects people's employment and income, it increased food insecurity, etc. And so when restrictions on mobility are instituted, it's very important to really combine them with targeted mitigation policies. And finally, with regard to the disruption in public services, it's I think we're all aware, but it bears repeating that there are consequences for human capital acquisition, particularly among children, who are the most vulnerable. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarosh. Please join me in extending a vote of thanks for a very good presentation that laid out the impacts of the pandemic and also noted the responses made by the government to mitigate the impacts of the pandemic. So I would like now to turn to part 2 of our discussion this morning. Please join me in welcoming Honorable Solomon Jamil, the Deputy Minister of Information and Communication, who will lead us through what we call a hard talk discussion. We have a panel, as I mentioned earlier on, comprising Mr. Sheku Bangura, Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. Ibrahim Stevens, Deputy Governor 1, Bank of Sierra Leone, Ms. Aina Mo, Managing Director, EcoBank Sierra Leone, Ms. Monique Newark, IMF Country Representative for Sierra Leone, and my colleague Olerio Cruz, lead economist with the World Bank. Honorable Jamil is known to many of you viewers. He has served as Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. He is also the spokesperson of the National COVID Emergency Response Center. He is a lawyer by profession, and also prior to his recent government position, I understand he served as a student leader and the president of the Fulham College Students Union. Please join me in welcoming Honorable Solomon Jamil. Honorable, you will be now leading us through what we call the hard talk. We don't know what you have in store for us, but over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Country Manager Dr. Mwenge. for the trust to moderate this very important panel discussion. And I am most heartily delighted to welcome our distinguished panelists who are designated to speak so instructively to the theme, economic reforms for a quick recovery from COVID-19. Dr. Mwenge, I'm so delighted to be here with you and your team of very consummate professionals, as much the same way as I'm delighted to see distinguished colleagues, including the Minister of Finance and the Deputy Minister of Finance. I am reliably informed the Financial Secretary as well, and also eminent representatives from IMF World Bank and perhaps other agencies connected virtually. So, as spokesperson, as rightly mentioned in the introduction, as spokesperson for the National COVID-19 Emergency Response Center, I'm pleased to note that we continue to see significant decline in case numbers, positivity rates, incidence rates, and hospitalization. As of yesterday, 7.7% of hospitals, hospital beds or beds in treatment centers and care centers were occupied. But given the fact that we are dealing with a propagated outbreak and we see variants of concern, we are not just in the business of containing numbers, but also our ambition is to strengthen capabilities across the broad spectrum of the response so that we're in a position to respond to future waves, future outbreaks, and also delighted to work closely with our development partners to see significant improvement in vaccination uptake. We have listened with keen interest to different speakers, and I must confess that also sitting here, I have benefited with tremendous profit listening to key presentations and highlights, including the one done by Kemo Mansouri, senior economist, on the economic developments, recent economic developments in Sierra Leone. So the report highlights critical areas, some of which might include the comfort that we all have, given the fact that the global economy is projected to grow by 6% in 2021, following the historic contraction. We see that advanced economies will grow by 5.1%, which seems to be slightly higher than the initial forecast. And the fact that that is driven largely by fiscal interventions and vaccination rollout. We see countries like the United States of America and UK have vaccinated 70% or over of the adult population. That is critical to note. And we see for sub-Saharan African economy, a 3.4% growth is projected. On the domestic front, a 3.0% GDP rebound is projected this year as restrictions are eased, and an average 3.6% real growth in the medium term. Agriculture, industry, service sectors will contribute 1.8, 0.6, and 1.2% points to the medium term. It is worthy to also note that reduction in COVID-19 spending will ease the fiscal space, that inflation will moderate and tilt towards single digits, and domestic revenue will ramp up. The report further suggests a causal link between COVID-19 restrictions and poverty, referencing the 2018 Integrated Household Survey, which shows poverty rise from 56.8% in 2018 to 58.9% in 2020. Several presenters have spoken authoritatively to a wide range of issues that squarely anchor on the COVID-19 and the implications for public health and the socio-economic landscape. And so we have no doubt that Dr. Mwenge, that our distinguished panelists are fully seized of these issues, and they have a strong appreciation of COVID-19 and the relationship with public health and the socio-economy. And I'm sure the report today focuses on the economic landscape, and I'm sure these panelists will help us talk more about those critical issues. So let me welcome, on that note, distinguished Honorable Sheku Bangura, Deputy Minister of Finance, who also happens to be my boss in the COVID-19 response. Dr. Ibrahim Stevens, Deputy Governor, Bank of Sierra Leone. Ms. Aina Moore, Managing Director of EcoBank Sierra Leone and Chair of the Bankers Association, Ms. Monique Niwerk, IMF Country Rep, Sierra Leone, and Mr. Aurelien Cruz, Lead Economist, World Bank. Gentlemen and ladies drawn from the public and private spaces, you are most heartily welcome. So let me start with you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. So let me start with you, if I may, Dr. Ibrahim Stevens, the Deputy Governor Bank of Sierra Leone. According to the report, headline inflation declined to its lowest level in 4 years, whilst the exchange rates remained relatively stable. What policies do you think explains this, Deputy Governor, if you may?
Yes, thank you very much, moderator. We're delighted to be here and as usual to participate in this, what we believe is a very important annual event by the World Bank. You know, the Sierra Leone economy is quite unique in many respects. So sometimes you even question whether the standard model applies directly to Sierra Leone. What I can say for sure is that the actions taken by the central bank last year actually increased confidence in the economy. And the exchange rate in Sierra Leone is largely driven by, you know, market confidence.
You seem to be coming in broken.
I'm getting problem with my network.
And you have to come back.
I'm so sorry.
I have to come back.
I think
I may have to come back to you. You're coming, but the interruptions seem to be incessant. I will come back to you in a short while. Let me come over.
I'll come back to you. Okay. Close the video. Close the video. I've lost.
Yes, I'll come back to you. Yes, I'll come back to you. So let me come over to.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you for your kind understanding. Let me come now to Aurelien Cruz, Lead Economist, World Bank. The report found an increase in poverty and a reduction in welfare and incomes due to COVID-19. What measures can the authorities put in place to boost welfare and incomes to speed up poverty reduction during and after COVID-19? Aurelien?
Hey, good afternoon. Can you hear me well?
We can, yes. Thanks.
Okay, great. So I won't turn on my my video so that we don't get interrupted, and also give you brief answers because I'm new to working on Sierra Leone. So I think I should be more listening than talking, especially given the high profile of the rest of the panel. But you know, when we think about poverty and welfare, income shocks due to COVID and the prospects going forward, I think there are short-term and medium-term perspectives one should take. In the short term, my view is that it's essential to maintain social protection and emergency measures for the private sector as long as necessary. And this is because you don't want promising firms that are temporarily liquid to close shop, and you don't want people to deplete their assets and stop investing, including in educating their children or feeding them adequately, as we saw in the presentation. So the question is, there's two questions, right? Given the constraints. One is, how best you target this assistance? We have some clues from the presentation that urban areas, the self-employed, are the ones that have needed support the most. And it seems that indeed the government has done exactly what was needed, which is target those categories of population. I think over time, it's really helpful to keep monitoring at a granular level those firms and those households that are the most impacted, and make sure that support is targeted to them. Then the next question is, for how long do you maintain this support? And that's where I think First of all, investing in, as we have done and showed in this presentation, in close monitoring of the situation through rapid surveys is extremely important because it allows to take the pulse of the situation. And perhaps there's scope to think about the types of indicators we should be monitoring to understand the level of stress both in the private sector and in terms of households. So for example, in India, they have a big workfare program, which is on demand, which guarantees people a certain number of days worked. So they use the applications to this program to determine the level of stress in real time. And I wonder if such indicators exist in the context of Sierra Leone that could be used to assess the need. Then, of course, in the medium term, it's all about growth and making sure that growth not only happens, but happens in an inclusive manner through job creation. And that's often a challenge, this link between growth and inclusion in economies that are resource dependent. So I think it's really about asking ourselves again, what are the features of growth that are more likely to be inclusive, and focus on those dimensions of growth that are most likely to create jobs, and then how best to convert the rents from natural resource into investments that then support more broad-based growth in the economy. I'll stop here, and I'm curious to know what other panelists have to say on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Aurelien. Again, my apologies, Deputy Governor, that I had to switch to the next speaker. I'm inclined now to come back to you. If you may just turn off the video and perhaps switch to just come in on audio. Are you comfortable now?
I think we should be fine. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. My apologies again, but the internet sometimes just goes into phases. You asked a question about the exchange rate and what you think, is or are the factors that were responsible. We have a flexible exchange rate system in Sierra Leone, and I was alluding to the fact that we've got a very unique economy in a way where sometimes even the standard model, plays games with us in terms of its applicability. However, a couple of things happened last year, as has been illustrated in the report, that were the primary factors driving the stability of the exchange rate. First, and perhaps most important, the Bank of Sierra Leone intervened in the market and provided 500 billion. This was Leone's, but it had a foreign exchange component within it. In other words, importers were given access to foreign exchange, as a way to ensure that we do not have supply importation problems. And, suppliers could import essential commodities. So the loan was available, but also there was foreign exchange component to that. So if you got 2 billion, you could actually pay for your goods that are on the high seas or that are expected to come in with 2 billion Leone equivalent in foreign currency. So there was stability. In addition to that, there was 2 major official inflows. There were 4 official inflows that helped shore up the reserves of the central bank. The IMF, a Rapid Credit Facility, the World Bank grant, the EU, and African Development Bank. So these were very important from the supply standpoint. But I think in addition to these factors, I think the most important factor that generated the stability you've observed is the confidence in the economy, because the height of COVID coincided this time last year with the lean season. Everyone, both suppliers, consumers, were alerted to the fact that the central bank had provided this stimulus to support importation. And therefore, there was this confidence in the economy and it's managed expectations quite well, both in terms of exchange rate volatility, but also in terms of inflation expectations. And inflation has an impact on the exchange rate. As our inflation trended downwards in relation to our trading partner, the US, our exchange rate became much more stable. So unfortunately, the other aspects of the report is not within the mandate of the central bank in terms of a direct impact on poverty levels. Now, the intellectual discourse in central banking circles has been, for the past few years, what is the impact of stimulus, economic financial stimulus, on the average person? When credit easing or quantitative easing is being done, stock markets would increase, but that benefits, the upper echelons of the food chain, as it were. So the only way you're going to alleviate poverty or address this big question if you have a combined a combined attack, as it were, financial and economic stimulus that supports the formal economy and direct intervention by the government, by partners like the World Bank, in trying to address the question of poverty. Because until when we take these actions, inflation decreases. If it as it did in Sierra Leone, for example, it reflects on a decrease in the rate of increase in prices. But the average man in the street may not see this as a welfare or as a benefit directly. Because not that prices aren't increasing, but they aren't increasing as they were increasing 12 months ago. And it's difficult sometimes for the average individual to discern, even in that case, the benefit of a relative decline in the rate of increase in prices. So I believe the central bank continues to focus on its mandate in addressing inflationary pressures, maintaining monetary and financial stability. Our counterparts over the Ministry of Finance, I believe the Honorable Minister is here, together with others, address the direct impact. I think the Munafa Fund is a good way in creating access to finance for the unstructured, non-standard market. But you may find that more needs to be done to impact directly on the individuals at an individual level. Let me stop there and allow others to come in.
Deputy Governor, Stevens, thank you so much for giving us the indices which, in the estimation of the Bank of Sierra Leone, may explain the relative stability in the exchange rate. Honorable Sheikh Bangura, if we may talk briefly about fiscal sustainability. COVID-19 has halted government's aggressive fiscal consolidation, resulting in a sharp increase in fiscal deficit during 2021. What measure has the government put in place to lower fiscal deficit and improve fiscal sustainability? Honorable Sheikh Bangura.
Thank you very much, Honorable Solomon Jamiro. And thank you to the presenters. Brilliant presentation, brilliant report. I think it characterizes the evolution of the economy during COVID, but also I think we take very well the observations or findings around the welfare impact of COVID-19 in Sierra Leone, at least in the last 1 year or two. So definitely that had brought on serious fiscal stresses, not least from the the kind of, I'll call it tank down that we have on the economy in terms of growth, which by extension does impact on your efforts at revenue mobilization, and also the attendant effect of trying to ensure that you are able to cushion or manage the risk inherent in responding to COVID-19 by investing more in the health expenditures and other policy measures driven by QAP. Our minister alluded to most of the programs that we have actually implemented, but I think the way I see the discussion is about going forward, right? So how do you ensure that what has been identified and the projected outlook on growth, you are able to ensure that you shore that up, or you at least preserve or protect that? Now, on the fiscal side, our economy is one that vacillates a lot, and that's well captured in the report. So what do you want to be able to do first to be able to support base expansion? Because it's all for the fiscal side, you have to ensure that you are able to shore up revenue. That's a very strong recommendation that came out of the report. Now, to shore up, to be able to ensure that you bolster revenue, in fact, our broad objective as an economy is to ensure that macro stability is kept intact, same so as financial stability, but also ensure that we implement all of these measures that could allow us to be able to bolster growth. That is the foundation of any effort at revenue mobilization, at any effort at bolstering your tax base. So on the tax base side, I think the first component has to do with efficiency and effectiveness in the administration of the tax policy measures. The NRA had a lot of reforms that it had started instituting, most of which were reversed in the form of responding to the pandemic by deferring either some of those deferring taxes or the like. Now, I think we should start to slowly claw that back in the sense that our approach to the responding to COVID now is not to institute hardcore closure or lockdowns. That's not really the approach we are doing, because we are trying to be more shrewd and prudent and try and understand that in an economy you have to have a fine balance between saving lives and protecting livelihoods. And in doing that, you have to ensure that revenue you have to continue to be able to mobilize the level of domestic revenue that can allow you to be able to fund government. So those measures, I think, in terms of deferrals and the like, I think are well captured, that they should be clawed back. That's one. We talked about base expansion. So efficiency in IT, all of these measures that they have in terms of
Yeah, mute.
We seem to have lost
I think with technology, we should be able to block those leakages and be able to ensure that that component of that particular component of tax mobilization is bolstered. I hope I'm still audible. So on revenue as well, let me speak to a particular component which is not like captured very efficiently. Now, NRA is committed to ensuring that the assure compliance, maybe from telecoms companies, but also the financial sector and the like. I think we could push that a little bit further, in my view. Telecom taxation or taxation of the telecommunication sector is a counter-cyclical activity, which in my view, under the current circumstances, the technology sector has been like a growing sector in the economy. But we have to ensure that efficiency is brought into the way that particular sector or the services provided therein are fully taxed. It takes basically investment in the technology itself to ensure that all the leakages or slippages that are in there, you will be able to suffocate them or close them by ensuring that you invest in what you take to properly audit calls, or audit transactions or use of data in the system and be able to tax them very effectively. I think once that you can actually expand the tax base in that particular sector very prudently. There are several other aspects of I think trying to push as well. The whole idea around tax expenditures, meaning exemptions, whether from duty waivers or exemptions that you give through income taxation. That's an avenue that you want to be able to plug as well. You want to be very purposeful in ensuring that you balance out incentivizing investments in the economy, as opposed to choosing on spending when it is not properly targeted. So that's what normally happens with waivers. If they're not properly managed, there are a lot of slippages that you have there. When they are properly cataloged or even reported at, you see exactly how much you've spent over a given year. So let me turn back. There are two sides to the fiscal component of shoring up an economy and trying to ensure that you limit the impacts that we have seen on the pandemic and the pandemic is here with us. And it's going to be here with us, I think, even in the outlook that we have been looking at. So on the expenditure side, there are few areas that I think are critical, and the report alluded to it. But one is our debt. We don't have an external debt problem as such, at least from the point of view of the cost of managing those debts in terms of interest payment. And not least, most of the external debt in terms of principal repayments, these are actually with long time, how do I call it, grace periods. What we are grappling with is that of domestic debt. And with domestic debt, the cost of and it's alluded to in the report very clearly, it's not only rollover risks, but it's also the cost of interest payment, which on an annual basis, I think is very huge component of our fiscal space, which on a weekly basis, I think suffocates even the little revenue that are mobilized. So that's an aspect that I think require deeper thinking. And the question I will normally put on the table is, we have committed, and I think we are fully committed. We take a posture that allows us to be able to claw in concessional financing within our debt limits and try and cautiously manage ourselves out of non-concessional financing. The government is committed to that fully within the framework of the bank and the IMF. However, a deeper thinking around how you tackle this costly one-year maturity, high interest cost domestic debt that is sitting on our books. It requires deeper reprofiling of the debt, in my view, and that's one of the key ways of ensuring that we provide a slack or free up a fiscal space in the budget. And it's about ensuring that the bank has instruments that I know that they normally deploy, policy guarantee, lending instrument that were used for countries like Ghana. They use it for Nigeria, they use it and the like, but I'm not sure how warmed up they are. It is about creating a portfolio of other forms of financing with longer maturity, right? That you can use to ensure that you allow some percentage of this domestic debt being brought down, make it less costlier, and then improve even on the DSC to some extent without increasing.
Deputy Minister.
We must be thinking about developing anchors around our debt levels that we may want to be able to pick up. Yes. So maybe I stop there, but there are several other prudent expenditure management, prudently managing our payroll, which I think it's ongoing, and then issues on ensuring that our capital spending, we are able to ensure that we become more prudent and tame it gradually over time, ensure that those that you are already exposed to, you are able to mobilize the resources to be able to complete the project. You don't want a white elephant on unfinished project on the table, but ensure that if you are bringing in capital investments, they are done in very shrewd, financially prudent ways that are off the budget as much as we can. Bankable infrastructure investment with innovative financing scheme could be the way to go. And then really fundamentally shifted or changed. So let me stop there for now, maybe. But those are the kind of issues that I thought we have been thinking about and talking about at the level of the Ministry of Finance. Over.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. Thank you for giving us a sense of government's posture towards fiscal sustainability and your views on innovative financing. Those are well noted here. And so at this point, Monique Newak, IMF country representative, I'm sure we all do agree, economies all over the world, it's important for them to recover from the contraction, from the pandemic shocks, and recover better and bounce back better. Sierra Leone is not an exception. So how can development partners like the IMF help to improve public finances and kickstart economic recovery? Monique?
Yeah, thank you. So I think most importantly, and that's why I liked what my colleague Aurélien said from the World Bank, our job is to listen first. So basically, when we support the government, it should really be on the government's priorities. And then we can be an advisor, we can provide technical assistance, and when needed, also provide financial support. For Sierra Leone, now with the COVID response and what we see from the co-op, the good thing is that the policy priorities remained quite aligned with the national development plan. And there, of course, focuses on human capital development, on good governance efforts, and for all of that, one needs financing, and therefore also big focus on domestic revenue mobilization. I'm not going to repeat everything that Deputy Minister Sheku Bangura just said. He made my job very easy in terms of what priorities in terms of revenue mobilization could be. But let me go a little bit into like how we can support in this area. And they are going back from like listening to the government priorities and looking into financing needs on revenue mobilization. Basically, a lot of the dialogue that has happened was on technical assistance. So when it comes to the NRA, that is doing a great job in trying to expand the revenue base, tax everybody in a fair way, expand taxation to specific sectors, as the telecom sector that Mr. Bangura just mentioned. A lot of that has happened in a dialogue with the IMF, and I'm sure also with other development partners. NRA is scaling up the data analysis tool, data analysis capability, and had asked for technical assistance in this area. When it comes to extractive industry taxation, we've been in close touch on the extractive industry revenue Act that is applied now to new contracts in the mining sector. And when we were just discussing in the context of our extended credit facility discussions last month and the months before, also the NRA and the Ministry of Finance have signaled that they would like to move towards a medium-term revenue mobilization strategy, update that, and expand on the good revenue administration efforts with more tax policy efforts. So, and we are looking forward to partner with the government on that as well. So basically, the punchline on basically on the advice is to listen first on the priorities of the government, and then see whether one has expertise in-house or other country examples to provide in terms of advising the government if there is a request for us to do so. Similarly, on the governance side, a lot is happening on PFM reforms. Here again, development partners can play a role. In 2019, the government asked us to conduct public investment management assessment to look into how to get more for every Leone spent in terms of investment, and that has fed into the PFM strategy that the Ministry of Finance is also pursuing. Coming to the crisis, of course, in close touch with the Ministry of Finance, with NACOWORK, as well in terms of how to set COVID fund, some bringing in some country authorities also from other countries virtually, from Mauritius, South Africa, Namibia, to see what best practices are. And then, of course, always in close contact also in terms of transparency measures. And here, one welcome result is that our board also has emphasized that Sierra Leone is one of the countries that has really stepped up in terms of the governance commitments in terms of reporting on the COVID response. So we see it really as a partnership. In addition, of course, to policy advice and technical assistance, financing is also important. And here, I mean, it's always an appeal to development partners to provide grant financing. We as the IMF provide concessional support, but it's debt. It's financing that we are providing to support the balance of payment and sometimes as on lend to the budget. Here, maybe like a welcome news also to the audience is that our board just last week approved the third and fourth review under the extended credit facility. And there the board acknowledged the progress Sierra Leone has made on a lot of the reforms despite the challenging times in 2020 and the COVID shock. So there was a lot of appreciation for the efforts, and as a result, the disbursement of $44 million was also approved last week. And another good news, this Monday, the board has approved the SDR allocation. This has happened 4 times in the IMF's history. This is basically a boost to liquidity to all member countries, including Sierra Leone, and that could also help them to bolster external buffers and also support critical expenditures. So to sum up, you asked how can we support, and I think listening, being an advisor, providing technical assistance when the government is asking for it, and then when needed, financing to support the fiscal and the balance of payments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monique. Thank you for speaking to a wide range of issues, including the $44.4 billion or thereabouts committed, which is somehow a validation of the progress that has been made. Thank you so much for speaking to those issues. And I wish to now bring in CEO Aina Moore. Aina Moore, as you are aware, businesses have not escaped the impact of the pandemic shocks, of course. And so, what product lines, in your view, have suffered most? And how has the banking sector reacted to mitigate the impact of the shock? Aina Moore.
Good afternoon. Am I audible?
Good afternoon. Welcome. You are. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and thank you, everyone on the call. The COVID has indeed had an effect on the business sector quite widely, but some sectors more so than others. And it is very clear. Some of the sectors that were principally affected have been mentioned before, including the transport sector, the tourism sector, of course, aviation sector. Trading also was affected, especially for the smaller traders, especially those who would hop on a flight and go to China and buy their goods. So because transportation and travel was affected, their business was also affected. These are the key sectors that were seriously affected during the pandemic. And listening to the earlier presenters, when they spoke to the fact that urban incomes were affected, you can understand that in that space, you had a lot of single owner businesses. And so when they couldn't do their business as usual, their incomes were affected. And of course, the households that they run or were part of would be affected. So what did the banking sector have to do? One of the things that we did is what we call forbearance, where we actually looked at some of these facilities that were, especially if we had facilities granted to those sectors. We knew that they were not able to, to meet the payment requirements that were agreed, or the payment terms that were agreed. So renegotiations were done, restructuring were done, moratoriums were given. For example, if you're supposed to pay on a monthly basis, we knew you were affected, we will give you, and these moratoriums will range from 3 months to a year. From the microfinance angle, EcoBank is one of the banks that has a microfinance wing. We also worked closely with the Bank of Sierra Leone and gave wide-ranging forbearance to in the microfinance segment, especially with a special focus on women traders. So that has also been effective because you then were able to not be pressured to pay your debts as and when due. We also, the banking sector also tried to push access to the financial services digitally so that you don't have to come to the bank. Of course, we remember that we were being encouraged by the health sector to ensure social distancing and staying away. So we drove the digital financial service platforms across the banking sector, where customers were not encouraged not to need to come to the banks for their business. But when we also looked at the fact that savings were depleted, because when incomes were lowered, people will tend to go back to their savings. So savings actually were affected a little bit, to the extent where people needed to delve into their savings. Interest rates around 2020 from the Treasury bills angle went down, mainly as the Deputy Governor mentioned, because of some of the interventions and some of the donor support that came in. Those were reflected in lending rates as well. Although now we have seen domestic borrowing from the government going back up, and as such, lending by the commercial banks or commercial lending rates are going up. But overall, and to summarize, I think we actually took steps to support, again, in line with the government and the central bank's posture, to support the credit customers who are owing the banks, so that they have liquidity challenges. They should not be worsened by the fact that they have to meet repayment terms that were agreed on and rolled out prior to COVID. So that's what I would say for now. But focus on SME financing is very key. We also participated in the Munafa Fund because we believe that that is very useful for the SME. They were the most fragile and the most affected. So the Munafa Fund project was quite happily received by the banking sector, especially the microfinance segment. And this has been successfully rolled out, as the minister rolled out the figures this morning. The 30 billion has almost been fully paid off, and we're hoping to be able to continue in the cyclical manner that this facility was supposed to be issued. The agricultural credit facility also is being reviewed, albeit maybe the uptake is a little slow. Looking at the data that is shared, it looks like the banking sector has only about very single digit 1 to 5% of our portfolio to the agri sector. That is not really aligned with government posture. And I think as a banking sector, we want to commit that we are going to ensure that we make available credit to the agri sector. We don't normally have maybe a lot of exposures to the education sector or the health sector as such. It's more trading. The construction sector was also impaired, but then the government had come in towards the end of 2020 and met some of the long outstanding payments to the construction sector. That also helped, as can be seen from the reduced NPL across the industry. So that's what I'll say for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, CEO Ainamo, for your intervention on the shock mitigation measures for businesses. So if I may have to come back to the Deputy Governor Stevens, we know that the Bank of Sierra Leone extended a 500 billion credit facility to the private sector through commercial banks. In your view, how successful was this program? What other measures can the Bank of Sierra Leone put in place to boost household welfare and incomes and support poverty reduction? Deputy Governor.
Thank you very much, moderator. Let me answer the question as far as practicable. The facility has been extremely successful, both in terms of actually delivering on our original objectives, which was to have essential items in the country at the height of the pandemic. In addition, the repayments have been on course, and we're very pleased with the returns that we've had so far. For market purposes, I would not give you an exact number, but the repayment schedule has been on course, and that's extremely important. Now, what else can we do? I'm sure you've heard all the other things that we've done. We have given forbearance to deposit to microfinance institutions, which means we have provided funds to allow microfinance institutions not to go after their customers at the height of the crisis. We have created the agricultural credit facility. It needs some tweaking to get more people on board. And we stand ready to continue to do all that we can within our capacity, within the powers that we have. I know, again, people expect so much from the central bank. Some of these expectations are not part of our mandate, as I said earlier. Others have to do it, but we will do all we can. Central banks up and down this region, generally speaking, have been doing quite a number of things that could be construed as outside their mandate. We are accountable to Parliament and ultimately to the people of this country. There's a defined objectives of the central bank, and we will do our best to continue to stick to that, while at the same time providing the necessary support to the economy as we are obligated by law to do. So we have a model that has worked. We are observing the repayment, and we stand ready to intervene if a similar scenario presents itself. We have introduced some forbearance for microfinance institutions. We have introduced a special credit for agriculture. And as the guest have just mentioned, there's going to be a boost to our reserves in terms of the SDA allocation. That, of course, increases the nation's external competitiveness. So that gives us, as it were, more armory in terms of meeting the uncertain future that besets everybody, because COVID presents an uncertainty that is unprecedented. So these are examples of what we've done in addition to the 500 billion, but we stand ready to intervene as and when necessary, given that that initial action has been quite successful and there has been a substantial repayment and everything seems to be going well and on course. So I'll stop there. But essentially, we stand ready to act and act big if necessary.
Thank you very much, Deputy Governor Stevens. So let me come back to Deputy Minister Bangura. Certainly, the updates captures compelling features of welfare and food security challenges as well. So as a follow-up to your intervention on fiscal sustainability, how can fiscal policy help address the reduction in welfare or incomes and growing food insecurity clearly identified by the report? Deputy Minister?
Thank you very much, Minister Jamiru. So I'll take up from where Mr. Cruz left, where he spoke about trying to drive inclusive growth. And the way to go about it, whether in the short or long term. For us, that's why we had what they call the Quick Action Economic Response Program. right at the inception of COVID. And that, I think, had turned out to be well executed in the economy. If not anything, if you look out the counterfactual, maybe you may think otherwise. But I mean, we deploy those resources in very targeted fashion to ensure that we limit the impact of COVID on vulnerable or different type of groups in society. So I think it is critical in the space to continue to implement those intervention, right, in the short term right now, continue to expand cash transfer, but in targeted fashion. That's why we will be doing this using respective institutions. Our partners, the bank, has been very instrumental. They've helped us with the platforms that could allow us to target the most needy, that are most vulnerable. In particular, say people living with disability, for example, for whom we are giving transfers. Micro grants, microcredit schemes. Munafa Fund is what we are implementing. I think it is very well implemented and deeply integrated. The banks have actually spoken to that. We are beginning to see how that is turning out. I think that those are targeted ways of intervening in the society. But also, to be able to drive growth, we targeted agriculture. We shifted our policy, bringing the private sector so that they will be involved in ensuring that we can provide farm inputs and implements to farmers in very targeted ways in this country. And they are done in time to be able to match up our planting season. It's the way you permeate an inclusive way of growing, given the size of agriculture in our GDP. So that posture, I think, is solid. And in the outlook, if you read through what the update had actually alluded to, the opportunities for growth into the future or in our outlook, it sits, 50% of that sits in the agricultural sector. So you want to capitalize on those kind of investments. But I think also when you have to target public works. We started off deeply investing in good sizable over 1,200 kilometers of feeder road in the country. They are linked to the agricultural sector. But what they do in that space is that they create opportunity for jobs for different category of people, both business people, but also people who will be doing labor related type of jobs. I think that's excellent. In a way, in the health sector, I must say, COVID will remain a risk in the outlook. It's a risk, a huge risk, and I agree with the report that we must take interventions in the health sector critical, not least that we have been affecting non-COVID related health interventions. As much as a way to be able to ensure that you preserve access to non-COVID health intervention is to ensure that you effectively manage COVID. Effectively manage COVID from different fronts. Where the greatest risks are in terms of, we've managed it very well so far, but the risks are still huge out there. And so investing in the effectiveness of your COVID intervention is very good, either through ensuring vaccination or beefing up your testing capabilities. But you must invest as well, in my view, on sequencing, because what we are seeing, much as it's a propagated pandemic. And so you are not going to get out of it and get to zero in the very long time until everybody is vaccinated, or you genomically continue to sequence any outward inflow of a different variant that actually emerges in the society. Schools, as we reopen, we are lucky that sincerely we had not locked down our school longer as in other countries. So we have to ensure that all the interventions we have around schools, we will reopen schools soon. I think we will reopen in time. We locked the last time, but we opened up for them to go and take exams, and we didn't lock for too long. We have been bold enough, understanding that and I agree to the recommendations. We'll restrain as much as possible in this country, fully locking down, because we know the implications of locking down on the vulnerable. So that's the posture. So you ensure that you don't truly lock down, but be very smart in the way you intervene by investing in those aspects that can limit the risk of permeating other activities in society. We will continue to do, I'll call other forms of investment in the society. But I think all those measures that we had within QUAP are measures that we are currently prudently implementing, because I think they are growth enhancing in a way, or growth assuring. And we keep on actually investing in them and ensure that those that we have not completed investment in, especially on infrastructure projects and the like roads, feeder roads and the like, we sustain them because we think they can actually help us going forward. So let me over to you. Let me stop there. But that's the posture. That's basically the posture. That's the posture of our interventions, and I think that should be able to help us into ensuring that we can avert or minimize the welfare implications or impact of the pandemic, but also be able to drive other investments that can ensure that our outlook is actually improved upon. Over.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister. Oriel and perhaps Oriel and Monique, you may wish to speak in part to this. The update captures increase in poverty and also drop in income. So, for example, the integrated household survey speaks to 6.8 to 58.9 increase for 2018-2020. And I listened to Kemo's presentation where, for example, he said urban households depending on self-employment income also severely affected. So from the World Bank and IMF's perspective, how can monetary and fiscal policies help to address the challenges of low income and increased poverty? Is there a room for any structural policies? Oriel, Monique?
Monique, ladies first.
Okay, thank you. Basically, a couple of thoughts. Like many other countries now, after the shock, Sierra Leone faces three immediate challenges, and this is what we call the fiscal trilemma. As you saw also from the results from the report in terms of poverty outcomes, there is, of course, an increased spending requirement. Right, before the crisis, spending needs were high. Now they are even higher. At the same time, you had a shock to fiscal revenues. Kemo showed that very well in his presentation, and debt levels are high. So now, how do you address the three all together? It's very hard. So, for example, if you go for higher social spending, investments in health, education, infrastructure, basically everything that the National Development Plan envisages, this means either higher taxes or it means higher debt, or both, unless there is some helicopter drop money, external support in terms of grants. So, and these challenges, and this is what is very well shown in the report, in particular on food insecurity, are now even more acute because you had the households impacted, you had food insecurity rising, and the food inflation is still very high. And at the same time, you need to roll up all the vaccination programs, secure the stock of vaccines, and then get the Sierra Leoneans to take the shot as well. So it's all about a balance. So I think restarting the revenue mobilization efforts, as the NRA is doing, working on revenue efficiency gains, thinking together with the Ministry of Finance, or with the Ministry of Finance in the lead, where one can reduce tax exemptions that may not be relevant now, not necessary. Thinking about the long-term, medium-term revenue strategy. I mean, these are all relevant even more. They were relevant before the crisis, and now even more. And at the same time, on the spending side, I mean, can't stress enough the relevance of social spending, of health spending. I mean, we have all talked about this in this round already, but really like putting a priority on these types of expenditures, social transfers, thinking about the school feeding program to make sure that when the kids are back to school, that they can learn efficiently, make full get the full benefit of the education. So all of this is easier said than done because the financing situation is so tight. But then you have like the mirror aspect in terms of efficiency of spending, and this comes back to the public financial management, public finance reforms, making sure that you spend efficiently. So there the PFM work will be critical, monitoring the debt levels at the same time. So what I'm saying is basically there's a lot of things to do for fiscal policy and public financial management in these times. On the central bank, and I really liked how Dr. Stevens put it in his remarks, is really critical to focus on the mandate of the central bank, really price stability, getting inflation down, but at the same time accommodating this uncertain environment. And this is like really a balancing act that the BSL is doing very well in terms of the co-op. We've talked a couple of times already about the special credit facility that has helped secure the supply of critical commodities. I mean, so food prices are high, but you always have to think about the counterfactual where they would be otherwise, supporting supporting finance to, I mean, what maybe we would not usually see in all of the countries, but as Dr. Stevens also said, I mean, there's a specific context to Sierra Leone. So a temporary agricultural credit facility may make sense to kickstart the activity and then phase it out once this has taken up, and all with an eye, can't stress enough, on the mandate of the BSL, as the deputy governor was saying. So this is in a nutshell on fiscal and monetary. Not an easy job. Will be a difficult or a challenging balancing act going forward. Then over to the World Bank, I think.
Hi, thank you, Monique,
Thank
and
you.
yeah, thank you, everyone. Yeah, I really don't have a lot to add to what has been said, so I'll just make some very marginal additions. I think the issue of the mandate of the central bank and the need to focus on its core mandate, which is price stability, is important, not only because it's the role of the central bank, but because it has a direct bearing on poverty. Indeed, I mean, inflation is probably one of the single most important channels that affect the purchasing power of households, and therefore controlling inflation is key. And that's perhaps a question that I would have raised if I could have to the presenter on the poverty impacts, which is the channel of inflation and increases in food prices. How much of an impact did that have on the trends in poverty? So I think monetary policy and conservative monetary policy to some extent can also be compatible with a pro-poor perspective. And then in terms of resolving the conundrum of addressing short-term needs while thinking of the long term as well. Look, I think there are, and others have said it, a couple of no-brainers, such as investing in health and health infrastructure, because that addresses both the short-term and the long-term imperative. So trying to get a sense of what are these no-brainer interventions that are both meaningful in the short and in the long term is quite important. Then I think, as others have said, I think that when we think about fiscal policy and the need to consolidate, which is undoubtedly there, the tendency is always to think of expenditure cuts. And I think it's important to think a bit broader, as others have said, to think on the revenue side, not only in terms of increasing mobilization, but about whether the system is progressive, whether the system is fair. Are there taxes that are particularly heavy on the poor and perhaps not putting the higher deciles of the income distribution to contribution. The example of the telecom sector was raised, but I think it's a really good one. Are the exemptions delivering their intended needs to stimulate investment, or are they just windfalls for companies or taxpayers who don't really need them? I think these are important questions. The efficiency and fairness of the revenue mobilization architecture, and then of course efficiency gains both on the revenue and in the expenditure side through PFM, through public investment management, just to make sure that every dollar is used to its fullest potential. I'll stop here and thank you very much.
Thank you both, Oriel and Monique. So just before I come back to Aina Moore, just to say this program also is being watched, it's being followed in different parts of the world. So we have Masaru Vashini, who says thanks for the real-time update on our economy. And Go Bato Samai says, I am watching the program live from Kono in Eastern Sierra Leone. And Ibrahim Miti Jallo says, I'm watching from Dubai. Thanks for a very informative program. But just a question now from Walid Bassoon. Walid Bassoon is asking, are there plans to provide credit facilities for local factories, similar to the ones provided for importers of essential items and the agriculture sector? I will ask that question again. Are there plans to provide credit facilities for local factories, similar to the ones provided for importers of essential items and the agriculture sector? So this, I think, is for the Bank of Sierra Leone. So Deputy Governor, please just bear that in mind. I'll come back to you, but let me go straight to Aina Moore. So according to the report, Sierra Leone's economy is expected to recover over the medium term, 2021-2023. What role do you expect the financial sector to play to support the growth? Aina Moore?
Yes, thank you very much, sir. I think the financial sector has a very critical role to play in any economy and in economic recovery, in particular, after such a pandemic. Now, the role we have to play is both to, firstly, ensure we widen the bankable population. We have to work very diligently on financial inclusion. So those who are currently outside of the banking net should be brought in. And this includes access to finance, but it also includes the generation of savings, which is a precursor to investments and wealth creation. So definitely one thing that the banks and the wider financial sector should do is to ensure access to finance. Partnership within the players in the sector, which is the banks, the microfinance, the telcos, will be critical. In today's world, digital financial solutions is the way to go. Any intention or plan or expectation that brick and mortar expansion of financial services will fail. So we must proceed boldly as a country and as a sector in that regard. We want to ensure that everybody has access to financial services. We also want to make sure that that access also is used to link the Sierra Leone to the rest of the world, where they're able to access products and services. The question was directed to the Deputy Governor, but also access to credit, especially for the manufacturing sector. It's important because the people in the manufacturing sector actually create wealth at a larger extent maybe than the people in the trading sector. So it'd be important for us to put some financing in that direction. So access to credit is critical. Everybody talks about it, but the credit culture and the certainty or the comfort that the banking sector has that funds availed will be repaid will be critical. When we look at the data, we realize that the loan to deposit ratio of the banking sector is pretty low when compared to the amount of money that is in the public domain that is given to government. That is not very good in light of pushing real sector growth. So we must find ways to, I think the economists would say, the government borrowing is crowding out the private sector. We have to find ways to enhance the credit appetite of the commercial banks or the financial sector so that they can be attracted to availing more credit in certain towards certain sectors of the economy. I am sure some of the data that was shared shows that majority of the financing goes to the trading sector, the importers, and some to the construction industry. But there are other industries that need to be supported. If we want to support our tourism sector, we should face the tourism sector. We look at the smaller players within the tourism sector. We look at the supply side of the tourism food chain, like the poultry and the butchery. These are the sectors that have to be dealt with so that, I mean, employment is created and wealth is enhanced. I also want to look at the ratio of the deposits of local currency to foreign currency. My boss at the central bank would know that. I might speak to this because if you look at it, I'm sure, and you compare to other countries where we only have about 21% loan to deposit ratio across the industry, that means we don't have as much money going out to the private sector. And 31% of our deposits in foreign currency, which is not available for credit. I'll leave it at that for now. So what I think the banking sector should do is to prepare itself to lead in digital financial service delivery, to ensure we use that as the platform to enhance financial inclusion. Financial inclusion should be faced not only as a solution to access to credit, but as well as a means of generating savings, household savings, as a precursor to investment and wealth creation. We also would support the SME area, although they are the most risky in our books when it comes to credit. They're the ones that have more direct impact in entrepreneurship, building entrepreneurs. And if we have so many small and medium-sized businesses recruiting and employing 5, 10 people, that is how we now, de-emphasize employment by the government or by the public sector, where the private sector is now supported even at the lower levels. So these are the thoughts I have as to what the financial sector would do to support. It's a very critical player. And I must say that government have been engaging us recently quite boldly, and we appreciate it, towards how we can work together to support the economic recovery of Sierra Leone. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Aina. Thank you so much. Deputy Governor, I'll have to come back to you in a minute to respond to Walid Bassoon's question. But before that, I just wish to put the panelists on notice that you'll be required to give not more than 1 minute parting shot so you'll be required to look beyond the recommendations in the report and how can the government attain strong economic recovery in post-COVID-19 world? What policies should the government prioritize? So that would, your 1 minute parting shot should focus on that essentially. And so as you formulating your parting shots, let me now come back to Deputy Governor on Walid Bassoon's question. Any credits for local factories?
Again, thank you very much. As I've emphasized, we try to concentrate on our mandate and intervene, in extreme circumstances. Ironically, the special credit facility that we put out also covered production. It was for the procurement, importation, and production of essential items. So if a manufacturer in country could have, again, quote unquote, produce an item deemed to be essential, they would have qualified. In terms of the generality of his question, which I believe is a very valid question, I think we are working with the commercial banks to address their business model. Together with some de-risking of these sectors, I believe the financial sector would come in to provide the necessary financing. But this cannot be achieved sole-handedly by the central bank. It requires intervention from others. Government, I know government is thinking about various interventions in terms of development finance. We will continue to develop the financial market, essentially to give the players in the market the confidence that they could, in a way, venture outside their comfort zones. Currently, the government is the largest player. It's borrowing more than anyone. It's employing more people. So as you reduce, the status of government in terms of these key variables to economic development, you increase the role of the private sector, you will get a much more balanced and efficient recovery or development, as it were. So specifically to the question, some of it could have gone to production, and if there was some manufacturing outfit that qualified, they could apply. Generally speaking, nothing on the horizon, but we will continue to work with government to reinvigorate industries, to formulate an industrial policy wherever we can support in creating a permissive environment in terms of regulation, in terms of moral suasion with the commercial banks. We will do that. So that's is a quick response to the question.
Deputy Governor. So as I said, I will require a 1-minute parting shot, but just a quick one for the Deputy Minister of Finance, because I know somebody like Walid Bassoun is casting a very wide net. So can the Munafa Fund target factories or manufacturing, Deputy Minister?
I'll imagine. So the Munafa Fund is for micro, small, medium enterprises. The size of the funding, I would imagine, may not be too huge. However, if their needs are within that limit, they are qualified to apply and go through the process with the different financial agencies that are facilitating access to the fund. Currently, the amount of resources involved in there, I think, are close to $10 million. So sizable, that's sizable enough depending on your need. So my sense is it is open. It's open to all small, micro, small, and medium enterprises. And I will encourage small industries, small manufacturing firms within the society. It comes not only with access to finance, but I think they are building their capacities as well in terms of keeping their books and business development and all of these advisories within the Munafa Fund architecture. So we'll encourage them. We'll encourage all small businesses, small manufacturing firms. If you have a small nail making factory, or you have a small, I'll call it tissue making factory, I think is an opportunity you want to capitalize on, in my view. And that I think the facility shall continue to grow. We'll source resources from different avenues with partners and the like. We just want to see exactly for now how it evolves, how it's performing, and how those who actually have access to the fund, how they are paying back. NPL is a big issue, as was alluded by most of the bankers here. It's a big issue in the banking system. So we want to ensure that this is a facility that is functional and is effective and is actually paying back. And then I think we will have actually exhibited. Yes.
Yes, Mr. Minister, and your 1-minute parting shot.
So, yeah, so thank you very much. Very useful exchanges. Here is mine. I think the outlook must allow all. By that, focus our intervention in drivers of economic growth. I mean, that in a diversified way. So our current posture in agriculture, going private, but also ensuring that we bolster access to inputs and invest in cash crop. I think it's a way to go. Mining is still a foundational, sector, subsector of the economy. So whatever we can do to ensure that all critical elements of the mining industry, be they gold, diamond, we must ensure that if there are rules, regulation, law, but make it more attractive to investors to be able to bring in foreign direct investment in the space and let them stay. And they must be of quality. So that's a posture I think we must look at. Look at other opportunities. I think there's a lot of outs for fisheries and manufacturing that we are bolstering. But enablers, we must go for don't look at energy deeply and diversify our mix, and invest in technology, connectivity, and then manage the risks that we face, which is purely our health interventions, sharp interventions, human capital development, and ensure that you protect the poor through social protection, and foundational piece, macro. We must ensure that we keep our macro stability intact by commitment to the fundamentals. Low debt levels.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Minister.
That you have a exchange system that can take off shocks for us. Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. Deputy Governor, your parting shot.
Yes, well, thank you very much. Let me thank the World Bank for a comprehensive report, and I think it was quite incisive in terms of the issues they brought out. I think going forward as a central bank, we'll continue to focus on our core mandate in delivering monetary and financial system stability, and also in supporting the general economic policies of government. Areas that are of primary focus for us right now is basically the transformation that are coming out of improving access to finance and leveraging on the development in digital financial services. We are moving at pace to ensure that we have an environment where our financial operators have access to some of the latest digital financial technologies, and we'll work with the banks to improve on their business model. I agree with the World Bank's suggestion that if you bring inflation down, of course, it would always impact positively on the poverty numbers. That we're not lost. It's not lost on us. We continue to do that. However, I think in terms of the average Joe Blogs on the street, it is with the government to try and directly impact on them on a daily basis. We will continue to support government and ensure that we have macro and financial system stability. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Deputy Governor. CEO Ainamo, your final piece.
Thank you, sir. I would like to reiterate the commitment of the private sector, private sector in the financial sector, that we are committed to supporting the recovery, because it is important for us as banks to ensure that we are aligned with government strategy. The report just shared today was quite insightful. I want to thank the World Bank for this, and it's quite useful. We just want to reiterate that we have seen where the difficulties are. We have taken note of where we see the fragility of the economy, where it is enhanced, and we're positioned to support. Again, as the Deputy Governor said, we would review our individual business models, especially for the areas of the economy where we believe will have more impact if we intervene, especially with credit products. We also will quickly and urgently work on digital financial solutions, because I could tell you that in other parts of the world, you have the SMEs access credit through their mobile phones. We're not there yet, and these are opportunities that are urgent. We would look to the ICT community to enhance and provide the infrastructure needed so that on which the digital financial solutions will ride. We want to end on a positive note that we are optimistic. We look up, we are optimistic about the outlook for the economy, and we are
Okay, I seem to have lost Aina. Monique, what words are you leaving with us?
Yes, so in closing, basically the Deputy Minister said macro, and I completely agree with that. When we look at other country experiences worldwide, diversification or periods of strong growth never took up when there was a period of macroeconomic instability. So stabilizing, keeping it stable is crucial, but this is probably also what you expected me to say. So let me also emphasize another aspect, inclusion, or what we know from Minister Senge as radical inclusion will also be important, not to say that this is the real game changer going forward in the long term. So that means, of course, better quality education as the government is pursuing, but also more equal access to education, in particular for boys and girls. So from the Ministry of Education, from DSTI, from StatsSL, we now have all the evidence and all the information to target the gaps specifically. And we know that this is not only a good thing to achieve in terms of development, it's an SDG goal, but we also know that this is a game changer for income per capita, for GDP per capita for everybody. So when we look into our estimates, closing the remaining gender gap in education could boost GDP in the long term by 8% permanently. So this is a win-win. It's giving like the whole population 8% income increase, wage increase, which is worthwhile striving for, like pursuing for many reasons, but also for the economy. And that was my final intervention for today, I think. Thank you.
Thank you for that final intervention, Monique. Aurelien, your parting shot, please.
Thank you very much. I'm humbled to be speaking again to this this great panel, and again I don't have a lot to say other than, you know, I think when we think of what it takes for a strong economic recovery, oftentimes we tend to overemphasize what the public sector can do, when in reality it's the private sector that will drive the recovery. And then we also tend to overemphasize the public investment role of the state, when the state is actually playing a very, very fundamental role in setting regulation. And the way that I would bring those two ideas together is that the public sector has a really fundamental, and the state has a fundamental role to play in ensuring that the regulatory environment is adequate for private sector participation and development. And there are, in our views, or in my views, some very, very important low-hanging fruits in terms of the framework for land regulation, the regulation of extractive industries. And I think that focusing on these with, of course, technical assistance and the support that we can give would be a very impactful contribution that the state at very little cost can do to support the recovery through the private sector. I'll end there. Thank you so much.
Thank you for speaking to the theme, economic reforms for a quick recovery from COVID-19. I wish to thank our distinguished panelists, Honorable Sheku Bangura, Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. Ibrahim Stevens, Deputy Governor of the Bank of Sierra Leone, Ms. Aina Mo, CEO, EcoBank Sierra Leone, Ms. Monique Newek, IMF Country Rep Sierra Leone, and finally, Mr. Aurelien Cruz, Lead Economist, World Bank. It's been an amazing discussion, and I'm so honored to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, please join me in extending another round of thanks to our Deputy Minister, Solomon Jamil, for the excellent chairing of the panel. Thank you so much, Deputy Minister. We extend a round of thanks to you. You've managed the panel in a very excellent manner, and you steered the discussion to the extent that we had active participation on social media. I've also received remarks from my team that we had over 60 participants on WebEx. We're live on AYTV, and I think our footprint on YouTube and Facebook has also been very excellent. So thank you once again. On behalf of my colleagues at the World Bank Group, I would like to sincerely thank the panelists for the excellent discussions. Our sincere thanks to Honorable Dennis Mandi for the keynote speech, and then our country director, the practice manager, colleagues, viewers. This has been an excellent launch of the Sierra Leone Economic Update that we know has featured a special topic of the welfare and poverty effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. What is important is how we take the report from here. The quality of the policy discuss we've had here, the policy discourse has been really high. We've had fantastic presentations from Kemo and from Salosh. So what would be extremely useful is we take the conversation beyond the visibility and the outreach we've had on social media. I would encourage each one of you to really think in your own way how you can influence the dissemination of this report. And this depends on where you sit. If you're a policy maker, there is one or two things you can try to apply in your day-to-day engagement. If you are a student or from the academia, there's a lot to learn because the economic fundamentals and the data used in this report is extremely useful. If you are the media, there's a lot to pick up in terms of the challenges COVID has presented, but also the response that the government has put in place to tackle the COVID-19 impact. And of course, to all the other viewers, it's a fascinating read. I would really encourage all of you to take a look at it. If you cannot access the main report, at least the presentation is highly accessible. I would like to thank colleagues in government, statistics, Sierra Leone, the Bank of Sierra Leone, and many other colleagues who have provided useful information and data that helped the teams to really put up this report, and definitely to our other colleagues who have supported the virtual launch, from the communication team, the IT team, and our SCS team on the bank. Once again, a huge round of thanks to colleagues in government, Honorable Minister, Chief Minister, and other distinguished guests who joined us today. You've made the launch a huge success, but like I said, what is important is how we make use of the report moving forward. So that is work for me and work for you. So let's see how we take it forward. Thank you very much for joining.